Okay, Rabbi Sai, today is Sunday. It's Chov Zayin Tammuz, the 27th day of the month of Tammuz. And we are learning Tanya, Kadisha, Perek Yud Gimel, chapter 13. It's on the top of page Yutes, or 37. Top of page Yutes. Okay? Now, as I explained to you in the last couple of classes, Perek Yud Gimel is Lachaira Agringet a Perek. It's an easier Perek. Yud Beis is very, very packed. Why? Because in Perek Yud Beis, the Alter Rebbe gives you his shita on what a Beinani, Madregas a Beinani is. Perek Yud Gimel is a little bit less intense because it's really like a commentary, like a Idoch Pirushahu on what he said in Perek Yud Beis. In Perek Yud Beis, he defined what we're calling Madregas HaBeinani, which is the higher kind of Beinani. And again, if you remember, the Lashon that we adopted is Melucho Memshala. A Beinani B'Shas HaTfilah is like a tzaddik. He's a king over his Nefesh HaBahamis. That means he's an educator of his Yetzer Hara. And Shalei B'Shas HaTfilah, when he's not davening, he's a Moshe, he's a dictator of his Yetzer Hara. And those are the two bases for this, what we call Midas HaBeinani, Madregas HaBeinani. So in Perek Yud Beis we touched on all of these things. Perek Yud Gimel is turning over stones. All the questions that we asked in Perek Aleph about Zeh v'Zeh Shefta and Hayei Beinecha Kirosh. And the last question we answered, which is probably the most important question that was asked in Perek Aleph, was Eich Tor Rabba Ba'atzvit Leima Shehu Beinani. How did Rabba Kvoyachal make a mistake and said that he was a Beinani? And again, we all know Rabba made a mistake. There's no question Rabba was wrong. Rabba was a big tzaddik. Rabba was the tzaddik Yiseidelu. Rabba Nachmani was the Rebbe. He was the Nasi Ador. He was literally the Nasi of the Sanhedrin before Rabbi Yosef. But a mistake also has to be reasonable. You know, a Yidat Tzaddik is not going to say Amarei Tzeach. Why? It's Sheker. In Lashon HaChasidus, it's not a Nov, it's Shiflus, it's Sheker, it's Baba Maises. So in last week's class, we read the whole Omid, where the Alter Rebbe is analyzing what the Rabbi's mistake is. He says it's a mistake. What was the mistake? Since we know that when a Beinani davens, because the Yetzer Hara goes to sleep. And since we know something else, and this is a big chiddush, that the Rabbi Bar Nachmani's Torah is like most people's tefillah. That's the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. But when Rabbi learned Torah, he's like most people are when they daven. You see, normally we say that the idea that when a Beinani davens, the Yetzer Hara goes to sleep is only b'shas and davening, because he's doing his bonus, which brings to Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. When you're in love with the Eibishter, there's no Yetzer Hara. When a person learns Torah, they're not thinking about the Eibishter, they're thinking about the Torah. And they're certainly not thinking about the Eibishter in a way which is made at Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. It's an avoid of Seichel. So most people's, to use the terms that have become staple, most people's melucha is when they daven, not when they learn. When you're not davening, whether you're learning or you're doing mitzvahs, or you're doing business, or you're doing recreation, then you're only a moishel v'shalit. He says the Rabbi had a unique Torah. That the Rabbi's Torah was like most people's tefillah. What's the hasbara? The Alter Rebbe doesn't say. He doesn't explain why. He simply says that leposuk puma megirse u'b'teretz. It's like the fourth line on top of page Yutes. U'b'teretz Hashem chefta yemam v'layla b'chafetza v'chasheko tshuka v'nerech sheva Rabba ki b'shas krishmu tefillah. Rabbi's Torah had Ava v'yira. So Rabbi learned Torah differently than most people learn Torah. So now comes the point. Yeah, there is a concept in Chazal which is called lei posek puma megirse. A person who doesn't stop learning Torah. Lei posek puma megirse. A person who learns Torah yemam v'layla. Does he know whether he's a Beinani or not? Sure. Why? Because most people, even if they're in the Madrega of Lei Posek Puma Megirse, when they're learning Torah, the Yetzer Hara bothers them. The Yetzer Hara bothers them. L'chol ha'poches. As a leiner shtickl balgaive, you should say, look at me. Als ich hätte von sein sehen, Rabbi Snowden Nevler hat immer gesagt, ja, man sitzt allein in der Zimmer und man darf top schon und man hofft, als Chotschika Ziegele wird da reinstecken in den Kopf und guckt dann. Das ist ein Wort from Rabbi Snowden Nevler. He was a personality from a generation of personalities. He says, you sit quietly in a room, no one knows you're there, and you daven hours, and you're hoping one goat will poke in its head for what? What's a goat going to see? Oh, Yisrael davened. But someone should notice, you understand? So most people, when they're learning Torah, not when they're davening, when they're learning Torah, the Yetzer Hara is there and they know it. When they daven, if they daven correctly, and they're davening with Rebbe calls the Shas HaKosher, Zman Tefillah, and Eis Ratzon, so then they're a melech, the Yetzer Hara is sleeping. But when they're learning, they know the Yetzer Hara. Since Rabbi Bar Nachmani's learning was like most people's davening, and Rabbi Bar Nachmani was like Pasik Pomemid Yirseh, when you add those two pieces to the puzzle, that when a Benyani davens, he's a king, Yetzer Hara is sleeping. And the Rabbi's learning is like most people's davening. And the Rabbi never stopped learning. You understand the mistake. We're not saying Rabbi was right. Rabbi was certainly a tzaddik. Rabbi was a tzaddik gomer. Rabbi was Reish B'nei Yisrael. You know, it says, Isi B'nei Aliyah V'Eimu Water. Right? Omad HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Shosam V'Chodosh Ne'emar V'Tzadik Yisoid Olam. There's a contradiction in those words. First you say muwatim, and then you say one tzaddik, and every generation there's one tzaddik. You say the Elam, one Rebbe, one Nasi, who's the Yisod, who's the foundation of the whole generation. Rabbi was the tzaddik. You say the Elam B'Deir. So how did he make such a mistake? So when you add these two things, that Rabbi's learning is like most Beinani's davening, and he never stopped learning. So Rabbi never knew: is it the pshat? I don't have a Yetzer Hara. I'm in a madregas tzaddik. Or is it the pshat that in Madrega is Beinani, but my Yetzer Hara doesn't get a chance because I'm Mispalo Kalayim? Because I'm in a state of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem all day long, and my Yetzer Hara doesn't have a chance to show itself, but I still have a Yetzer Hara. So we say two things. Rabbi made a mistake, and it's a mistake which can be discussed in Torah. It's a mistake which has a... You could understand how Rabbi could have made this mistake. This is what we learned last Sunday. This was the last particular... We learned this when we learned... But Hashem's how this we learned last Sunday to explain how Rabbi was able to make this mistake. And I told you last week the word that I read in the Rishimah Heinz van Sefer, called Avnei Chen. It's an incredibly good book, very well researched and very well written, and everything is sourced about the history of Mishpachas Chen. You should know, Chen is the second thing to royalty in Lubavitch. I'm convinced of this. This Beis Harav, Schneerson, and after Mishpachas Chen is amazing. And what's amazing about Mishpachas Chen is how many of them survived. You know, all Mishpachas, I said this was left after the war and all the others. Mishpachas Chen is geblieben to I'm sure they lost many members, but there's such kind of horror. The Mishpacha is so great, so large, and still so strongly connected to the Alter Rebbe, Pashat. From the times of the Alter Rebbe. A guy told me that he married an Einikel from the Meir Simcha. And the Rebbetzin said to him, the Rebbetzin Chaimushki, Bist an Eigener, are you an Eigener? This is not a language of the Rebbe, but this is a language of the Rebbetzin. He didn't know what to say, B'nech an Eigener. So he said to the Rebbetzin, B'tei Chami Anechi Yeshavas, I'm like everybody else. So the Rebbetzin said, whatever you were, but when you marry into this mishpacha, the Rebbetzin said, Bistan Eigene L'chol Adeyes. It's not just a Meir Simcha. The Meir Simcha is one branch. It's a gigantic branch with so many children and so many grandchildren, so many great-grandchildren, and with there's many other branches. It's a gigantic mishpacha. Lane is Chen also. You know, Lane is Chen also. And now you have Raskins that are Lane. It's an incredibly great mishpacha. Anyway, I don't mean to carry on. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But the Radatz was a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek, he was a chassid from the Rebbe Marash, he was a chassid from the Rebbe Rashab, and he passed away during the Nesius of the Frierdik Rebbe, Tafresh Peivav. He passed away in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. He was a real gadol, a real chassid. The Rebbe Marash said to him, so he must have been in his 30s. He was born in 1840, born in Tafresh. The Rebbe Marash was nostalgic in Tafresh Mem Gimel. The Radatz was 42 years old maximum. So it probably happened before he turned 40. And he was Ma'arech Yom, he lived well into his 80s. The Rebbe Maharash said to the Radatz, quote, Es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedas HaTzadikim. It's time to think about Avedas HaTzadikim. Last week somebody asked me, what's the difference between Avedas HaBeinani and Avedas HaTzadik? And the answer is, when I früher darf nach Mashachet from Taneges Beinani. Danach wird trachten wegen, you know what I'm saying? I mean, how am I supposed to answer the question? But in my imagination, when I think about it, the difference between a tzaddik and a beinani is always on the defensive. A beinani is always afraid. The V'chatasi negdi summit. A tzaddik has a peaceful avodah. It's a different avodah. It's a whole different. In other words, he's not afraid of Ra, so he can afford to engage in aliyas in a way that I think a beinani can't. But I don't know. But this is the only story that I know of any rebbe telling any chassid to raise him up from the madrega of beinani to the madrega of tzaddik. There's a story with Rabbi Isaac Homler. You know that. That the Alter Rebbe said to Rabbi Isaac Homler. Isaac Homler was also a godel, an emissary godel. The Alter Rebbe said to Rabbi Isaac Homler, "Eisel kum mit mir in mikve, weil ich der Ruf habe." The Alter Rebbe said to Rabbi Isaac, "Come with me to the mikve. I'll make you Dutch tzaddik." And Rabbi Isaac said, "Ich will allein haben." Rabbi Isaac Homler was Meirich Yomim. I don't know how long he lived, but he for sure lived into his 80s. He passed away Tafrei Shudzai, 9 years before the Tzemach Tzedek. And he was much older than the Tzemach Tzedek. He was probably 20 years old. The Tzemach Tzedek passed away at 77. He had a Riches Yomim. The Alter Rebbe gave a bracha for Riches Yomim. It's brought that he was between 90 and 100 years. We don't know for a fact that Rabbi Isaac Homler had a bracha for the Alter Rebbe. There was a chassid by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac of Vitebsk who had a bracha for the Alter Rebbe Riches Yomim, and he Poshet lived 99 years. A bracha for Riches Yomim from Alter Rebbe. Kusha Lepler, it says in Ayem Game, yeah? He negotiated a benish payerish yarin, yeah? He had a bracha with Alter Rebbe Riches. We know a number of chassidim who had a bracha with Alter Rebbe for a Riches Yomim between 90 and 100. Tzemach Tzedek had such a bracha, so he should have lived till 90. He passed away at 77, and there's a kama v'kama sibis and remozim et falot. There's episk getroffen. So given merbe ein zach not getroffen. Anyway, so I don't know if Rabbi Eisel had a bracha, but he lived a very long time. And the Alter Rebbe told him, Eisel, come in mikveh, v'lech der Ruf heb, come mit mir in mikveh. So Rabbi Isaac Homler said, I will harven allein. And the pelle is, Rabbi Isaac remained a beinani at Seif Yamav. Rabbi Paracher, who could have been Rabbi Isaac Homler's son, easy, maybe his grandson in those years, was in Madregas Tzaddik. And Rabbi Isaac wasn't. The Alter Rebbe offered him the matan, he refused it. But again, a story from one of the Rabbeim, the Nasi of Chabad, where he actually says to a chassid, that you have a shaykhas, tzadikim. I don't know any story besides for this one. That's why I'm telling you the ma'aseh. What's the point? The point is that the Tanya starts with a Gemara that says Kol ha'elam kula yein l'cha tzadikat. Chayei b'nech ha'garash. The ganze Welt, the ganze elam loshen helem tells you you're a tzadik. Don't believe. When elam hazeh, when people who have Yetzer Haris come to Reuven or Shimon or Levi or Pliny and Almighty, and they say, "Oh, you're a tzaddik, don't trust." Was for a mavin is something. So what's Yossi Miklal zeh? A yid who's not part of Kol Ha'elam. A rebbe could say to a chassid, like the Rebbe Marash said to the Radat, "Es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedas HaTzadikim." It's a very pneumistic thing. There's nothing about this that's forgive me for using the word, that's Polish. It's very deep. It's very pneumistic. And I'm telling the story because I simply don't know any other. So the context is that the Rabbi was certainly a tzaddik, but you have to say upon him, no one in the Madrege of the Rebbe Maharash ever said to Rabbi, es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedas HaTzadikim. Chotsh afilu, Rabbi Ben Nachmani was a Talmud of the greatest Ameroyim and so on, but he said, "Oh no, beinani," and he was wrong. But wrong also is mitacheshben. Wrong is also mitacheshben. The wrong is not wrong is not childish. Wrong is not low self-esteem. Wrong is not shiftless. This is the Nakuda. Okay? Now we read on. We're on top of page Yutes by the 2 dots, which is 8 lines into the page. Okay, there's one more Nakuda in this pedic. It's a very interesting Nakuda. Okay, let's read. V'hine. Midas ahava zu ha'amura bebeinani b'shas ha'tfila. We described Madregas ha'beinani, right? The beinani of Perikid base. In Mitzvah Hashem, in the next Perik Yudal, we're going to have a different beinani, yeah? But we described the beinani of Perik Madregas ha'beinani, yeah? Madregas ha'beinani. this phenomena of Melucha and Memshala. What does that mean? That when a Benyan davens, the Yetzer Hara is sleeping, not a problem. Why? Because during the davening, the Benyan is in a maimed matzav of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and that's the world of tzaddikim. If you love the Eibush and you fear the Eibush, that the Yetzer Hara doesn't have a voice. So the Rebbe says this idea that a Benyan during davening is a king, not a ruler, not a dictator, but a king, a melech, not a meshach. Is because during the davening the neshama is so strong that he's in a maimed matzav of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Says the Heilige Rebbe Hine Legabe Madreges HaTzadikim. When you compare this Beinani's davening with the Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem that he's experiencing during the davening, who are Eivdei Havaye Be'emes La'amite, who are serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in absolute truth, and this double lashon Emes La'amite is a very strong lashon. Says the Rebbe Ein Bechinas Avazu, this tzidkis, this kingship, this melucha, this sense of right now I'm holy and truly involved in Hashem, because there's only one voice during the davening. So ein bechinas avazu nikras b'shem avedas emes klav. It's not called emes. The Beinani is called a bluffer. You know, the language of Hasidim in the olden times. When we stop and we think about ourselves, wird nicht Geschmack. Ich meine, it's be'ein arech. The guy I know was like Yossi Morosh Heidenik. So I took the other side. He was complaining. Just the other day in Shul, I said, you take those Hasidim, put them in our time. See, wie sie wollen sich nicht zu geben. I mean, the Nisyonis are unbelievable. The Nisyonis are mamish not from this world. Not from, and so many of them. So many different Nisyonis. It's half of a fella. Bemis. Bin leploim, half of a fella. The Nisyonis was mir leben nibir. Our generation. Anyway, but the language of Chassidim Amol, what was the language of Chassidim Amol? Abisala emes, right? You know the story with Herschel Zeitlin Alav Shalom. I mean, listen, we've learned just a few times. I've told the story a few times. It's a moedin de kamaisa. Unfortunately, since the last time I told you the story, his son also passed away. The Rabbi Lezer was a shliach of the Rebbe in Tzfas, a very chassidish yid, very ibig Rebbe some Rebbe. So Aaron Lezer Zeitlin, told the story that his father used to say l'chaim. I mean, I remember a little bit the Herschel Zeitlin, and he knew how to say l'chaim. Often I'm all stege, but he was a chassidish yid. You know, when you say l'chaim, whatever you are becomes more. And he was a chassidish yid, so he said l'chaim. He was more chassid. Yeah. So it was a simchas Torah. Aaron Lezer was a boy. I don't know, 8 or 9. And this is a long time ago. This is the 60s, the Chofs. The Elam was smaller. The relationship with the Rebbe on some level was different. Even as an adult, even I remember this. People walking over to the Rebbe Simchas Torah and Zogen Epis. He was very shikir. It was Simchas Torah morning. He was shikir. And he says to his son, Megein Sim Rebbe. Uninvited, there's no preparation, there's no appointments, there's no Chadakov, there's no groaner. The Rebbe finishes Musaf. Simchas Torah Musaf finishes around 2:30 because you have the Ataresis, which takes forever, and then the Akofis, and then you have the 3 Sifrei Torah. Mistam at 2:30 the davening finishes, 2:45 chveis. And it's Simchas Torah. And everybody knows that Simchas Torah, the Rebbe on Simchas Torah was like, it was different than any other day of the year. It was a gilui that you could see, an availability, a closeness. So Rebbe walks out of shul, he goes upstairs, and Herschel Zeitlin chases after the Rebbe with his little boy, and the Rebbe walks into his room, and of course when the Rebbe walks into his room, closes the door. He's close enough behind the Rebbe to grab the door, and he walks in with his little boy, uninvited, no appointments. The Rebbe turns around, and he sees that he has company, Simchas Torah, and the Rebbe gives a shmeichel. I mean, the Rebbe's smile, yeah, you know that it's brought that the Maggid had geschonken the Malten Rebbe a shmeichel. You know that it says this? The Mezritcher, that smile that we know so well. The Mizitcher Magid had geschonken dem alten Rebbe Mashmechel. The Mizitcher Magid gave the alten Rebbe a gift of smile. That with this smile you can conquer the whole world. And this smile went over me Rebbe le Rebbe. This is the smile that we know. But the alten Rebbe didn't want to use it. Why? Because Chabad mont avoida, Chabad mont pnimius, and avoida b'koyach atzmei, and so on and so forth. But it's brought that you wear that smile. Wear that smile that could be mafadek ahorim. Mamish can rip, uproot mountains. It's a gift from them. It's a chemagit, it's a mountain that Rebbe. It's brought in the siches. I forgot. Ich meine, it's a double you do. It's not a psasoid. And the Rebbe gave him one of those smiles. The Rebbe Heschel was filled in. The Rebbe wasn't afraid of his shikris punkt. Yeah, you understand yourself. Yeah. So we're hearing the story from his son. So he says to the Rebbe, Ich will dienen dem Eibishten mit chotschek habissele emes. I want to serve Hashem with a little bit of truth. And he starts to sob. The little boy, Adam Lezer, who told, it's written in his book, they made a biography of his father. Heschel Tzeitlin passed away young, unfortunately. And they made a biography of his, which I have. I read it. I remember where I read it. And the story is in there. And he's like, I couldn't understand, what's my father crying? Well, what Aveda did he commit? What son is he? And rain that didn't be. So the Rebbe, Kedarke B'Kodesh, this is classic, throws out his hands. That's the whole story. Why a little bit of truth, a lot of truth? This is a story. I don't know if he had gone into the Rebbe Rashab, he would have gotten such an answer. It's der, shov, der, manhigov. It's every doir. It's a different Rebbe, and it's a different avoid, and it's a different ashpah. A pshat, to understand pshat. But we all know that in Chassidus hat man gesucht emes, right? That's what they wanted. It says in the Hayem Yem that if the Alter Rebbe had not written in the Igeres HaChidish Koteinti, the second letter in the Tanya, b'midas emes layankev, he would have 50,000 more Chassidim. And it's not up to school. It's not in your ruchni, you know. He hadn't written down 3 words. He would have 50 more thousand. It's the pshat. Eibes hat nicht gemont. He didn't insist on emes, right? Aber vazom and toon as Chabad mont emes. Everything about Chassidus Chabad is emes. From the word, I told you this all the time. I love this word. I don't remember where I saw it, but ich habe es nicht beschaffen. Ich kann dir versichern that the Alter Rebbe said as follows. The Alter Rebbe said, Afareinem emes is netoke nesnagdus. An absolute truth has no opposition. Dacht sich mir as mein davnen is areinem emes. An absolute truth has no opposition. I think, the Alter Rebbe said, that my davening is an absolute truth. And it's a dover yoduam of ursim that no one criticized the Alter Rebbe's tefillah. As much as the Alter Rebbe had minagdim, the Alter Rebbe's life was so difficult. He had minagdim mi chutz und mi bayis und mi chutz. He had minagdim von alle Seiten und auf alle Fronten. Whatever he did was no good. But no one criticized the Alter Rebbe's tefillah. Even though there was so much to criticize. The fact that they would put padding on the walls. He shouldn't hurt himself because he would hit his fist against the wall so hard. It says that even Lamayel had a kapeda because his tefillin was not where they were supposed to be. But the Alter Rebbe's davening was a rein emes. Chabad was even emes, zuchen emes, monen emes. And emes is not a simple matter. Oh, I want to tell you this last word. That one of the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, and it says who, but I don't remember. One of the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe said, I think to the Mittler Rebbe, maybe to the Tzemach Tzedek, but it was during the Nesias of the Mittler Rebbe. He says, the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were Chassidim, and the Chassidim today are Tzvuim. They're Echa Bepev, Echa Belev. They don't have, they're phony. So means they're painted. It's not real. It's bluff. And he agreed. Again, I forgot whether he told it to the Mittler Rebbe himself or he told it to the Tzemach Tzedek. He's a cook of them younger man, and he pointed at Reb Hillel. Reb Hillel happened to be in the Beis Medrash, and whoever this critic was said, "Poor, look at this, he thinks he's a big tzaddik." And whoever he told it to, either the Mittler Rebbe himself or the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, says, "No, der younger man is an andere. No. You're right, but not about this one. This is emes." Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe says, "A yid davens." And B'shas HaTfilah, he's holding on a madreg of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. His Yetzirah is asleep. He's a king over his goof. He's a melech, not a Moshe. And a tzaddik looks at him and says, bluff, sheker. Favos, let's read. Go back to the text. Because me'acher shechelefes ve'iveres acher HaTfilah. Because when he finishes davening, it's going to pass away. And therefore, something which is here today and gone tomorrow isn't even here now. The rule about a truth is that it never changes. Something which is today true and tomorrow false is really false today also, you just don't see that it's false. Because if it's an emes, it's unchanging. If a yid davens, and during the davening he's in a maimed of matzav of avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, the liboy, like a melech, he's temporarily in a matzav of a liboy cholu b'kir. But after the davening that's going to pass, and he's going to be where he was before, that's not emes. Because that's in the pasuk. Sfas emes tikin lahat. Abrekele emes, the edge, the breg, the edge of truth is forever. The definition of emes is forever. That's why you say that the Eibishter is called emes. And the Torah is called emes. Because the meaning of emes is davar she'ein beishinuyim. It never changes. Va'ad argiyah. And anything which is argiyah, the shadish of the word is a rega. That is just for a moment. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Lashon sheker. It's a sheker. So here you're talking about a yid who's not stam a beinani. He's a beinani on the level of madregas a beinani. Madregas a beinani. And the Alter Rebbe says that tzaddikim look at him and they say sheker. Why? Because acher HaTfilah is chalevas eiveres. Says the Alter Rebbe afapikein. Nevertheless, don't misunderstand. Don't misunderstand. It's true that when a tzaddik looks at this beinani, he's going to say va'ad argiyah l'shein sheker. Legabe madregas ha-beinanim, compared to the step of the beinani himself, nikras, it is called, and he uses two different expressions. Number one, aveda tama, a perfect, a whole, a complete aveda. And number two, he calls it be'emes lamite. This beinani, who during davening is in a maimed the matzav of avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, and after davening it's going to pass away, and the tzaddik calls it lashon sheker, legabe madregas ha-beinani, it's called aveda tama, and it's called emes lamite. Now aveda tama I'm not going to explain today. Aveda tama I'm going to explain to you in Perek Tezvav in Mitzvah, which is a few parakim away. We're holding Yud Gimel. The meaning of aveda tama is an expression in Nigle, which means avoida she'ein acharei avoida. Avoida tam means it's an avoida that finishes. There's no avoida after this. In other words, avoida tam means that if the beinani would go any higher than where he is right now, he would be in madregas tzaddik. It's the highest madrega of beinani. Avoida tam le beinani. A yid who learns chassidus and thinks chassidus, and b'shas HaTfilah is in a maimed matzav of revealed avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. Me'ach shalta alev, not just controlling the heart, but educating the heart. And during davening, Yetzirah is asleep. He is in the realm of beinani aveda tama. He can't. There's no higher beinani than this, because anything higher is tzaddik. And the fanasipur. Again, I forgot from whom I heard this, but I heard this from my mashpiyim, the yeshiva. I could see myself sitting in the vabrengen, but I can't remember who told us the story. That there was a levaya that the Rebbe Rashab went to himself. The Rebbe Nishma Seidin went to levaya in Lubavitch. And he came back from the levaya, and he went into the Cheder Sheni, they used to call it the Chabadnitze, the Cheder Sheni, the small room near the Zal, to say Yeshe B'Seiser. Reb Shilim Kurat, Reb Shilim Disna, he was later the Mashgiach, who was still davening. Reb Shilim. He was still a Bach. And he was davening. And you have to read Shmerel Batumer, Shmerel Derov. Shmerel Sasonkin has a sefer called Zichrei Neisei. And he has a chapter where he describes David and Shilim. David Aradaka, David Kivman, and Shilim, the davening, and the difference between the two. David was a natural Morash Cheder. His concentration for him was like you breathing air. He says David davening was totally collected. He says the only thing different between David's davening and David's learning is that when he davened, his eyes were closed, and when he learned, his eyes were open. But Shilim was a Mora Levena. Shilim was a Freilecher. He wasn't, concentration didn't come naturally. Yeshua Milchome. I told this to you recently that I saw that Rabbi Alter Simchovich said about Reb Shilim, Ich bin an Eides, as Shilim hat gedient dem Eibishten. I forgot the word he used. The fullsten wie viel ein Mensch kann dienen dem Eibishten. You couldn't serve Hashem more than Reb Shilim. That's what Rabbi Alter Simchovich. You know what that means? And Rabbi Alter was a big Balbadregi himself. Reb Shilim was davening, and his eyes were open. And the Rebbe walked in and sat down right in front of him and said, Yeshe b'Seiser. Reb Shilim didn't move. He didn't see him. He sat down on Reb Shilim's right. He sat down on Reb Shilim's left. He sat down 7 times. A hakofa, yeah. There's 8 possible seats theoretically around that person. The Rebbe sat in 7 of them, and Reb Shilim didn't budge. When the Rebbe finished saying the 7th time, Yeshe b'Seiser, he said, V'zu hi aveda tamal lebeinanim. Those words of Perek Tesvav. He had just the words aveda tamal. And there were Bacharim who saw this. The Bacharim watched this happen. Reb Shilim was davening, and the Rebbe Pashat sat down in every position, and he didn't see the Rebbe. His eyes were open, he didn't see the Rebbe. Later on, I think I heard it from Zalman Lushansky in Marston. Later on, one of the Bacharim told Reb Shilim what happened. And Reb Shilim said, I don't need to know this. Now I got to deal with the guy and the yeshes. Why do I have to know this? It's not going to help me. It's only going to make my life more difficult. Aveda Tamam. So I said, we'll talk about Aveda Tamam, Mitzvah Hashem Perek Tesvav. But the Alter Rebbe says, a Yid who's in Madregas Beinani, that during the davening, his bonus, it's a Shas HaKosher, it's a Yisrotzen, brings to reveal the Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And his Yetzer Hara for the moment is asleep. The Tzaddik calls it Sheker. But Legabe Madregas HaBeinani, number 1, it's Aveda Tamam. More on Aveda Tamam of Mizak, stay tuned. But he also calls it Be'emes Lamita, it's Emes. Not Stam Emes, it's absolute Emes. It's not going to last. And the definition of Emes is something that never changes. So the Alter Rebbe now explains it. Herdwerter. Because it's ish, kefi madregose be madregas habeinanu. Because when you talk about emes, you have to understand each person relative to their own madrege in avodas habeinanu. A tzaddik it's not. So the emes of tzaddik it isn't. But a beinani it is. And just like there's an emes in the world of tzaddik, and you understand yourself, how does a tzaddik gomer look at a tzaddik she'enei gomer? Same story. How does a tzaddik gomer look at a tzaddik she'enei gomer? You understand? Yeah. So the tzaddik she'enei gomer is garnish, it's hakfleish, it's ish kefi madregose. So the Alter Rebbe says in Beinani itself, it's ish kefi madregose, and this Beinani is avodah relative to the world of Beinani. It's called Aveda Tama, and it's called Emes Lamita. And now comes a very sweet lashon. Hareini koirei ich zog. Where in the Tanya they have the word I? Where in the Tanya a lady said to me, the Rebbe said ich more than once, a lady said to me that she had her nisyonis. She had a very special relationship with the Rebbe. And she got on a bus, she was going through hardships, she got on a bus, she was out of town. She came to New York and she went into the Rebbe. And it's always in the heart, said a lot of tzaras. And the Rebbe looked at her, and the Rebbe said to her, Kol ma de ovid rachmon l'tav ovid. He didn't say gamzel l'teva. The difference is Kol ma de ovid rachmon l'tav ovid means now it looks bad, you'll see later it'll be good. Gamzel l'teva means it's good now. The Rebbe didn't say to her, gamzu l'teva. In other words, stop seeing Ra. The Rebbe told her, so she said, I blurted out before I could swallow the words, verzokt. The words came out of her mouth. I mean, not only the chutzpah, she would never speak that way to the Rebbe, but the word just flapped. And the Rebbe smiled. Ich zog. And I promise you today, this woman sees the latav of it and all of the things that she complained about. I mean, where in the Tanya do you have ich zog? Only once, right here. There's only one place in the entire Sefer Tanya where the Alter Rebbe says ich. Hareini koire, ich zog. Sfas emes tikein lo'ad. That the Beinani's avoida, which is chaylev v'heilech acharat tefillah. Now he has avos Hashem and yiras Hashem, and after the davening, it's not going to be sustained. I say that it's the edge of truth. Now, I just want to tell you a word that I heard. I have a friend who's a Shnei Zalman, and he said to me, "You don't know the hint?" I said, "No, I don't know the hint." There's a minig Yisrael Teirehi that before the second Yil Ratzon, you say psukim based on your Hebrew name, right? It has to be the first eis. The first letter of the pasuk is the first eis of your name, and the last eis of the pasuk is the last. What's the pasuk for Shnei Oir? Sfas emes tikkun la'ad v'ad argil l'shein shoker. The Alter Rebbe said this 3 times a day. Hareini koirich. I heard it from a Shnei Zalman, who heard it from his mashpiyim, that the Alter Rebbe Poshet said this in every tefillah, and he was mechaven that when a Beinani serves Hashem to the best of his abilities, even though compared to tzaddik, it's not considered emes. Compared to the sfas emes tikkun la'ad, is what's the lashon emes la'amite? No, aveda tama be'emes la'amite. So Alter Rebbe says, Hareini koire. I actually say this every day, and this is what I'm mechaven. Ich zog, I say, this is emes. Why? He says several svaras. Number 1, svara number 1. Paltiel, because ubekayach nefshem alakis, there is the strength in their neshama. Lachsed ule'ere bechinas ahavas ule'elim. Anytime they want, they can stop, and they could be mizbeinin, and they can reawaken this ahava. Even though the Alter Rebbe says it has to do with eis ratzon and shas hakesher. In other words, it's not only up to you. You have to daven when the doors are open from his heart. Here the Alter Rebbe says, anytime this Beinani wants, he can reawaken this avos Hashem, yiras Hashem. B'hiska berusa, b'shas hatfila, mitayim. Just like when he davens, because he does his bonus kedem atfila, he zoichet that bitfila, he achieves the madreg of avos Hashem and yiras Hashem. This Beinani is in a position to repeat that anytime he wants. By making the appropriate preparation, l'chol nefesh, for each person, kifi erko madregasa, according to its worth and according to its step. So the first reason that this is emes is because it's koyach. You know about Chanukah, yeah? Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel says basar Paltiel, and Beis Shammai says basar keach. Beis Hillel says kineged yamam v'ester hayotzim, and Beis Hillel. Shammai says you light 8 candles the first because there's 8 days left, and you 7. Beis Hillel says no, you the one the first. You count what you already have, yeah. But Shammai is also a shita in Teira, the potential, the koyach. Since this Beinani b'koyach has this avos Hashem and yiras Hashem, because he has to just stop what he's doing, do his bonus and awaken the avos Hashem and yiras Hashem. So it's Pashat Chaser Peil. He's simply this minute not doing it. But if he wanted, he could stop what he's doing and be waking it again. So it's called constant. It's considered constant. Okay? That's number 1. Number 1. Now he says number 2. Now, of course, you could read this as a hemshech, but you could read this as a separate inyan as well. What's the separate inyan? Ki. Hinei. Midas emes midas asher yankev. The Rebbe does a 180. He does a philosophical twist. Turns it all around. He asks a kasha on his kasha. He asks a kasha on his kasha. What's the kasha? The kasha is l'chayre. Every Beinani is a shakran. Every Beinani is avoided shakran because his adargiyah. He's have avos Hashem yiras Hashem for this rega, and the rega the avos Hashem yiras Hashem is going to go away and be replaced by something else. So is a siman that even when he has it, it's not emes. Yeah. So let me ask you a different question. Yeah. Emes never changes. Yeah. Yeah. Is emes everywhere? Is emes everywhere? Yeah. Yeah. Really? How about the Nelam HaSheker? Is there an emes Nelam HaSheker? So in other words, Alter Rebbe turns the question around and says, you're saying that this Beinani is Aveda Sheker, which means that you're saying emes is Sheker. Because if you limit emes to an elam emes, and you exclude emes from an elam sheker, what kind of emes is that? If it's emes, it has to be everywhere. So in other words, instead of asking on the beinoni, ask on the midas ha'emes. If midas ha'emes is without shinuyim, midas ha'emes has to be in sheker itself. So you have to say that in every world there's emes, even in beinoni, even in Baal Tshuva, and I guess on some level even in Russia. Ki hine midas ha'emes midas ha'shank. This is the other side of this coin. Just like emes never changes, emes can't be stopped. So in every level there's an akuda of emes. Says the Rebbe that what is the midah of Yaakov Avinu, Hanikra, Briach, Hatichein, the central bolt, the central pole, Hamavriach Menakatz, that bores through from one end to the next. Mirum Hamalas Amadregas, from the highest level and step, at Seif Kol Darga to the lowest step. Ubechol Milo, on each level, on each step, Mavriach, it bores through Teich Nekudo HaEmtsoyes, the central point, Shehi, because in every world there is a center, and that Nekuda, which is the center, is Nekudas, is the point. Ubechinas Midas Emes, and the measure of the criteria of the measure of Emes, Shalah, in that world. And he continues, you should know that Midas Emes Hinachla B'li. If Midas Emes is Emes, has no boundaries. Not only has no boundaries, Lamailo. It has no boundaries, Lamata. There is no place in this creation, in the darkest and the deepest and cruelest sheker, where you can't find the Nekud of Emes. Ve'ein l'shir l'mayla drama mayla. Just like Emes has no end when you measure how high it goes. V'chol mayle so madreges shalamata mehen. Shalamata, lower levels of Emes are ke'ayin legabi mayla so madreges shalamayla mehen. Is like nothing compared to the emes which is higher than it. But it's true the other way around, that as low as you go and as much as you can get involved in sheker, there is no place where the midas emes does not have a nekuda. And then it brings up Kabbalah, ki do li yedechein shebechinas reishu mechen shemadregas tachtenes is lamata bechinas akvaim v'ragle madregas ayenes mehen, like it says in the Gemara on the pasuk ragle achayis keneged kulam v'en kanamakim. This bracket I don't know, and even if I knew I wouldn't teach, but I don't know. Okay, what's the Rebbe saying? If you say that some levels are sheker in an absolute way, then emes itself is sheker. Because for the same reason that emes is b'li shinuyim, emes has to be b'li mitzorim. So emes is everywhere. It's a very different word, says the Alter Rebbe. We're not saying that the Beini's avoid is emes because if he wanted it could be made Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. No, we're saying a Beini is a world. That world has a toich. That world has a nekudim tzoyis. The toich and the nekudim tzoyis of every world is the emes of that world, and this Beini is holding by that toich, and this Beini is holding by that nekudim tzoyis. So therefore, even without the idea that he has a koyach to reawaken the Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem anytime, just the way he is, he's Midas Emes. And I want to a part of Verte, a little. I'm not going to speak for very long.
Same point as sheker can't exist without Emes.
See, but over there we're talking about Klippa. Over there we're talking about Klippa, that Klippa has to have a Nekud of Emes. Here we're talking about Avoida. But Klolos is the same thing.
Sheker is not sheker.
Pratius, it's... I always use the same mashal. This is the mashal which doesn't sit in Ayin Beis, yeah? How much space does a corner occupy? We've done this mashal 100 times. This is Maidiv. And this is Tzafon, yeah? South, north, west. How much area is the corner? An inch? Take the inch, divide it in half. Half is north, half is west. How much is the corner? A millimeter, take the mill, divide it in half. And of course the answer is, corners don't exist. Walls exist. Corners don't exist. Corners are conceptions. When you have a physical thing called a wall, and you have another physical thing called a wall, and you put them at right angles, a third thing emerges called the pina. But the pina itself is not tefes animokum. The pina is the idea of crossing together two worlds. And of course in Midas Shebenefesh, that's Tiferes. Chesed is a feeling. Whatever chesed means. Gevura is a very different feeling. What's the feeling of Tiferes? It's a mix of Chesed and Gevura. So it's a mix of Chesed and Gevura. So half of it is Chesed, half of it is Gevura. What's Tiferes? And of course the answer is there's no such emotion as Tiferes. There is the emes of Chesed and Gevura. That's Tiferes. It's 50% Chesed, it's 50% Gevura. But what makes it Tiferes is not that it's half and half. What makes it Tiferes is that it's connected to an Akudah which is higher than the Metzias of the Midas. And it's called, close, it's called the Rachamim. That's how we basically translate it, yeah. The Rebbe is not talking here about corners. The Rebbe is talking about an Akudah. A point is smaller than a corner. A corner is, at least has one dimension. A point has 0 dimensions. The Rebbe says everything has a point. How much space does a point occupy? Take a piece of paper and put a dot in the middle. How much space does the point occupy? If you can take a magnifying glass and you can make the point bigger and bigger and you can measure, it's not a point. It's just a smaller area. Relative to a whole sheet of paper, the dot in the middle is called a point. It's not a point. But you put it on the microscope and you can see so much detail, so much nuance, so much anomaly, so much disorder. So a point is a concept. It's a concept. It's a higoyim. You know how small a point is? You can't split it in half. But everything radiates from that point. Just like this wall, and this wall radiates from that corner, and the corner doesn't exist. Everything radiates from that point. There's an akudah. It's called midas ha'emes. And there is no place where that akudah is. And it exists in the world of tzaddikim, and it works in the tzaddik sheini gomor. It exists in the world at all different levels of madregas habenyani and midas habenyani and rasha v'tevlin, rasha v'ralian, bal tshuva. Everything in the creation has an akudah. That nakudah is its emes. Because this is not about that creation, it's about emes. If emes is emes, it's belim etzadim. If truth is truth, you cannot say that it only exists in the world of truth, not in the world of falsehood, then it's not truth. I always think this when I daven, We say at the end of davening hallelujah. How many hallelujahs do we say? I think we say 6, yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hallelujahs from Ashrei till the end of Tilim, yeah? The second hallelujah is Halali Nafshi Es Hashem. Right? Look through that Pedic. What's the Nikud of the Pedic? And of course, I don't know. I just tell you what I think the Nikud is. Hashem emes li'elam. That's the Nikud. Therefore, Eisa Mishpat Lashukim, Neisem Lechem L'Revim, Matar Asurim, Bekei Achivrim, and so on and so forth. It's a Elam HaSheker, yeah? So how does it come that people do each other favors? How does it come that people let a person out of jail, they feed the hungry, yeah? Because Hashem emes la'olam. That in Welt, in Helen Vehester, for an emes. That's like Hashem emes li'olam. The Eibishter makes sure there is no place in the creation of the Eibishter where there is an emes. And Elam Hazeh, Agash Mibachumri, Tachte and Shein, Tachte, Lamata, Amen, and the Bechinas from Gili Alakus. Can't be worse. The Eibishter is totally behelen. Hashem emes li'olam. In this world there's emes. In everything there's emes. In every person there's emes. In every creation there's emes. Not because you're such a big Balmaila. Because emes is a nachla bli mitzarim. Emes doesn't allow that there should be a place where emes isn't. And Hashem emes le'elam is the Eibishter make sure that emes comes out. In elam hasheker. Vaisech midas emes. Emes platzes out of elam hasheker because it's a nachla bli mitzarim. Says the Alter Rebbe. We started a conversation about a Beinani. And we said that his avodah is not emes because it's adar here. So the Alter Rebbe says, "Areini koire ich zog." I say, it's tzvas emes tikkun la'ad, and I'm giving you 2 reasons. Number 1, Pasha, the person, the ovid, since he has a koyach to reawaken the avos Hashem and yiras Hashem anytime he wants, so it's emes. And then there's a number 2. Now it's on the person, it's on midas emes. In everything there is an akudah. The Nekudah is the emes of that thing. This Beinani is the Nekudah and the emes of the world of Beinani. Just the way he is, he's emes. I compare to Tzaddik, he's not emes. Because there's different emes. Because emes is nachal b'li mitzvah. This is how the Alter Rebbe finishes this painting. That the Beinani's avodah is considered avodah tam. Now why is this so important? It's so important because it really speaks to the Nekudah of the Tanya. The Nekudah of the Tanya is Rebbeinu Shalayla Brasa Tzadikim Brasa Rishayim, which you're going to see in the next painting. What's such Brasa Tzadikim Brasa Rishayim? Hashem created different types of people. He created some people to be tzaddikim, and some people to be beinim. He didn't create people to be Rishayim. Tzaddik v'Rashalei Ka'amar, but tzaddik u'beini Ka'amar. Are you going to complain and say INF? It's not fair. Why should one person become a tzaddik and the other person be b'dregas ha'beinini? And the answer is there's different worlds. In every world there's a nekuda, and the nekuda is the emes of that world. And that's what's expected of each one, to reach the nekuda of the world in which they exist.
What is the emes and sheker?
Well, for sure the nekuda of emes and sheker is nisoyen. Right? Today, litin sochal teva tzadikim shem mekaimim, and that to be put him in the rashayim shem abdi. But just think about it, yeah? What would happen if in Elam Hazard there was no gossip? Yentis. Yentis, gossip. There'd be no shidduchim. Mention was reden wegen Menschen is amida, nicht amida ros, amida maguna. It's a very popular pastime. How much good comes from that? And I don't think there's anything in the world that you can't see that way. You know, as a Gemara, I think about Rab Nachman. That was a Chayzer Bakechavim who said to his mother that your son is going to be a Reitzeach. So I'm forgetting the two Gemaras, but one of them was, he told her, make sure you always wear a yarmulke. And the zweite Sache is, er wird ein Sheichet. This is Gemara. I know where the Gemara is, but I forgot the pratim of the Gemara. I haven't seen one in a long time. But this is the Teuchen Gemara. I think the Rebbe said, and if I bring it, that it's brought in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's brought in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So that's emes and sheker. The Eibishter created the world the way he wanted to. You know, like the famous letter from the Friedrich Rebbe, Dafka Zoya Nicht Anders. The Eibishter created each one of us the way he created each one of us, with honest, yenis. A person has to be makim akemi. If a person is not makim akemi, that's rachmanis. If a person is makim akemi, even if he's a yeshiv kronis, with a taner be'er meyef, the Eibishter has a kavanah for this yid. And there's an akudas ha'emes in that person. And his, you know, like the Fortim of Zusha, what's expected from him is to be Zusha.
Let's say the idea of emes by a Russian. So if he recognizes that it's wrong at some point, that's...
Fana Gemara. Yesh mi shekene lo me b'sho achas.
Is that
L'chayra.
you say that in the Shama of every Yid, no matter where he is, what tribe or not, has in the Shama, is that...
For sure. But you have to understand the Alter Rebbe's word. The Alter Rebbe wants to use the word emes about avoida. Avoida, not about... He doesn't even want to rely on koyach. Neshama, there is matana from the Meibish. He wants to say there's emes in every person's work.
Okay, so in Avodah, that is not control of Avodah, but the person is not doing what's right. Is that called Avodah?
When we'll be the Eibishter, the Mitzvah Hashem, wird man haben, verstehe, haben am Avinus, ich meine, there's so many stories of the Rabbi. There's a story that I heard from two different people. And I really want to go back, because one of the persons told me the stories with names, line and verse. There was a woman in Montreal, this goes back 75 years, who was a Greise Gvirte. She was not fru. She was not a Shemer Shabbos. She was very rich. And she had a real Yiddish heart. She was one of Rabbi Kramer's biggest supporters. You're talking when the Chachamim first began. If I'm not mistaken, the Friedrich Rebbe was very, very ill. You're talking over 7. Friedrich Rebbe was nostalgic 7 years ago. And they needed to install in 770 the equivalent of central air conditioning. I don't know what that means in the language of 1948, but it was something like that. It was exorbitantly expensive. I think it costed then $5,000. Hamoy. He came to this woman, Rabbi Kramer, and said the Rebbe darf haben für die Gesund. The Rebbe personally, she paid the entire school, which was a lot of money. So again, I don't know how it came to be, but she was by the Rebbe, by Friedrich Rebbe. And the Friedrich Rebbe started to be Meshabeach her, like you have in the Sefer of Rus, with Kerochel, with Kaleya, like Mamish, like Imoy Soilam. The Friedrich Rebbe started to shower her with praises. She says, Rebbe, es ist doch nicht Emes. Ich bin nicht fromm. So this is how I heard the story. Tochter, wer weiß, wer ist fromm? That was the Friedrich Rebbe's answer. Tochter, wer weiß, wer ist fromm? Okay, let's take a break, yeah? I heard the story from two different people.